So this is one of those occasions where you have like a rare person that shows up in the seerah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who, while her mention is not much, the consequences of what happened with her is actually huge to the dimension that we have today of our fiqh, of our jurisprudence. So the Prophet ﷺ, as we said, he wanted to marry Usama ibn Zayd radiyallahu ta'ala anhu wa an abihi to someone of a higher class. And this goes along the same lines of how the Prophet ﷺ tried to marry Zayd radiyallahu ta'ala anhu to people of a higher class so he could break through those barriers. So the wife of Usama is a woman by the name of Fatima bint Qays al-Qurashiyya al-Fihriyya. Fatima bint Qays al-Qurashiyya al-Fihriyya. And she's actually one of the earliest of the Muhajirin. She's one of the first of the Muhajirin. She, alongside her brother, Al-Dhahhak ibn Qays. Al-Dhahhak ibn Qays. Al-Dhahhak was about 10 years younger than her, so she's actually the older one. Her and her brother embraced Islam in Mecca, and they're from Banu Fihr, so they're from a powerful tribe. And she married, at that time, she was married to her first husband, a man by the name of Abu Amr ibn Hafs ibn al-Mughira al-Makhzumi. Abu Amr ibn Hafs ibn al-Mughira al-Makhzumi. And this is the first cousin of Khalid ibn Walid radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. So Khalid ibn al-Walid ibn al-Mughira, he is Abu Amr ibn Hafs ibn al-Mughira. It's the same family. Banu Makhzum is the tribe that we were talking about in the story of Usama ibn Zayd radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, the tribe of Abu Jahl, which just shows you, again, the status, right, of these people. So she's someone who embraces Islam alongside her husband, alongside her brother, and one of those muhajirin that we don't have too much information on, but the description of her in the books of Sirah is كانت ذات جمال وعقل وكمال. That she was a woman with supreme beauty, with supreme intellect and completeness. Like she was the total package. A woman of elite status, a woman of elite beauty, a woman of elite intellect. So everyone would have wanted to be married to this woman, Fatima bint Qays, because of the tribe that she comes from as well. Her mother was also from Banu Kinana, Umayma bint Rabi'a. And she makes the hijrah to Al-Madinah. Now, she narrates the hadith. If you remember when we talked about Tamim ibn Aus al-Dari, Tamim al-Dari radiyallahu ta'ala anhu was the hadith of al-Jassasa, the hadith of the beast, the one who came from a faraway land to the Prophet ﷺ, and he told him the story of encountering that island, right, where he saw certain alamat, right, certain signs that the Prophet ﷺ had spoken about. This is her hadith. She narrates this hadith because she says that I was sitting in, and there's a visual here, I was sitting in the front row of the women when the Prophet ﷺ stood on the minbar, and he said, Tamim just came to me, and the Prophet ﷺ recounted what Tamim ibn Aus al-Dari had shared. So we get that hadith from her. It's a very long account, which is known as Hadith al-Jassasa. But we also get a lot from her divorce. Her divorce and her subsequent remarriage are full of some of the most consequential discussions that happen in Islam. So she says, "Talaqani zawji thalatha," that my husband divorced me 3 times. So she becomes sort of like the touch base of the touchstone of like how we deal with talaq and how we deal with iddah. It's one of the earliest cases of divorce that we have between the Sahaba, right, where you actually have some of these issues being litigated. So to give you context, she's not with her tribe in Banu Makhzum. She comes from a powerful family, but she's not with that powerful family right now, right? At the end of the day, these are refugees that are married to each other, that both come from powerful families, and the husband divorces the wife, and it gets to a point of irrevocable divorce, and he does not provide for her anything in terms of sakan or in terms of nafaqah, in terms of housing or maintenance. So the Prophet ﷺ, I guess that's the outrage, right, of the situation. The Prophet ﷺ, she says, "Amarani Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam an a'tadda fi bayti ibn Ummi Maktum al-a'ma." the Prophet ﷺ ordered me to observe my iddah in the house of Abdullah ibn Maktoum. Very interesting, by the way. Early refugee problems. Number one, what was she entitled to? She said that my husband had only given me 5 containers of barley and 5 containers of wheat, and that was it. And the Prophet ﷺ approved of that. So she didn't have any nafaqah, she didn't have any spending on her, she had no kids, and she had no house to stay in. Okay? Typically, the iddah is done in the house where it happens, right? You're supposed to stay together, and there's supposed to be a whole process that takes place here. She says that the Prophet ﷺ initially told me to do my iddah in the house of a woman by the name of Sharik. And then what ended up happening is the Prophet ﷺ said, "Inna bayta ummi sharikin baytun yakhshahu al-muhajirun, walakin i'taddi fi bayti ibn Maktoum, fa'asa an tulqi thiyabaki fala yaraki." So he says to her, radiyallahu ta'ala anha, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, radiyallahu anha, he says, look, Sharik's home has a lot of foot traffic. This kind of shows you the early hijrah elements. There are a lot of men that are coming to her house constantly. So instead, we will allot for you a place where Abdullah ibn Maktoum lives. He's blind and he will not be able to see you, and you'll be secured, and you go ahead and you complete your iddah over there. So this is a very different type of divorce, marriage, iddah situation that's taking place here. And it becomes a source of contention later on in terms of like, what are the rights after a divorce, and how are the Sahaba supposed to make judgments, and how are the Imams supposed to make judgments in this regard. This is also, mind you, before many of the hadiths of hijab the ayat of hijab were revealed. The ayat of hijab are 4 years into the hijrah. So the hijab has not been made mandatory yet, right? Many of the laws of how genders should be were not yet revealed. So this is a case in early Islam that happens here. But I don't want to stop there. I'll get back to how this comes up later on in her life. But we come to her marriage to Usama. The way that her marriage to Usama happens is actually powerful. So Abu Bakr ibn Abi Jahm, Abu Bakr ibn Abi Jahm, he narrates this hadith. He says that I heard Fatima bint Qays say that the Prophet ﷺ said to me to go and complete my iddah in the house of Ibn Maktoum, and when you become lawful, tell me. Meaning the Prophet ﷺ is saying, tell me so I can find you a husband. So I told him. And then the Prophet ﷺ said to me, has anyone sent a proposal to you? So I said, Muawiyah and Abu Jahm. Muawiyah and Abu Jahm. Now, this shows you her status. That before she's even done with her iddah, 2 men already have their proposals. I mean, she's beautiful. She has a lot of intellect. She has a lot of status, tribal lineage, all that is there. And she's getting 2 proposals from these 2 men. So the Prophet ﷺ responds, and he says, أَمَّا مُعَاوِيَةٌ فَرَجُلٌ تَرِبٌ لَا مَالَ لَهُ. As for Muawiyah, he's a poor man who doesn't have money. Pause here for a moment. Some of the ulama say, is this Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan or another Muawiyah? Okay? Because Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan comes from wealth. So is this Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan or is this another Muawiyah? It could honestly be both. But one of the narrations actually says Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan, and we'll make that assumption for a moment. What the Prophet ﷺ might mean is what he meant when Hind bint Utbah came to the Prophet ﷺ and complained about the father of Abu Sufyan, the father of Muawiyah being Abu Sufyan, and said that Abu Sufyan is rajulun shahih, he's cheap, he's stingy. He doesn't give me my basic rights. So it might be, some of the ulama say it might be that the Prophet ﷺ is not saying that he's actually poor, but that he lives a rough life that he's going to withhold from you, right? Or it could be that because of the political circumstances or social circumstances that at that time, it's wartime or whatever it may be, that Muawiyah actually did not have enough money. Allah knows best, right? But take the maqsood, take the what's being alluded to. The Prophet ﷺ said, Muawiyah is a man who's not going to spend on you. And the Prophet ﷺ said, as for Abu Jahm, he said, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, that rajulun darrabun linnisa. He's a man who hits women. He's a man who hits women. Some narrations, the Prophet ﷺ said, he's a man who doesn't put down his stick. So some of the ulama said, it either means he travels all the time or he hits, right? He hits with his stick. In some narrations, though, the Prophet ﷺ says, ضَرَّابٌ لِلنِّسَاء, like the Prophet ﷺ says, he hits women, right? So he carries his stick. So the Prophet ﷺ said, I advise you to avoid both of them. The ulama take from this the ruling of the permissibility of warning someone of a harm that's coming their way, right? So this is one of the exceptions to the rule of ghibah, right? The rule of backbiting. You don't talk about people for the sake of talking about them. You don't talk about it as a pastime. But if there is a legitimate concern to withholding information from someone, then you should share that information with that person so that they don't find themselves in a bad situation. So if you read any book on, even if you go to Ihya Ulumuddin or you did Mukhtasar Manhaj al-Qasidin here, right? When you look at the permissible cases of ghibah, this is the hadith that will be used as one of the forms of dalil. The evidence is that it's permissible to warn someone if a harm is coming their way. So the Prophet ﷺ said that, look, Muawiyah is not going to spend on you, or Muawiyah doesn't have money. And secondly, as for Abu Jahm, then he's someone that is potentially abusive. The irony is that the hadith is narrated by who? The son of Abu Jahm. The son Abu Bakr ibn Abu Jahm. And I actually went into the books of Rijal to make sure it's actually his son, not just someone named Abu Bakr ibn Abu Jahm. No, this is actually Abu Bakr ibn Jahm ibn Sukhayr. So this is actually his son narrating the hadith about his dad's rejected proposal, okay, from the Prophet ﷺ. So then what happens? The Prophet ﷺ says, I have a better idea for you. Why don't you marry Usama? فَقَالَتْ بِيَدِهَا هَكَذَا Usama? Usama? She said, what? Usama? Usama? You want me to marry Usama? Okay. Why? Again, like, come on, Banu Fihr, Qurashiyya, you're telling me a minute. Muawiyah and Abu Jahm. And by the way, what lends to the idea that this is the Muawiyah is that there's a whole story that goes on in Islamic history where Dhahak ibn Qays, her brother, becomes one of the generals of Muawiyah later on. So clearly there's a Banu Makhzum connection here. Her first husband is there, and there's a connection at that level, right? But she says, Usama? Usama? Prophet ﷺ said, listen, Ta'atullahi wa ta'atu rasulihi khayrun laki. Obeying Allah and obeying the Messenger is better for you. So this is what I'm advising you. Like, I know what I'm saying. SubhanAllah, with Zayd and Ayman, right? You want to marry a woman from Jannah? This is that. So she says, my initial was like, no way. So she said, tahawunan, she's saying about herself, bi amri Usama, like I was belittling Usama. Then I said, when the Prophet ﷺ said that, sam'an wa ta'atan lillahi wa li rasulihi fazawwajnihi, that I said, I hear and I obey Allah and the Messenger ﷺ, so marry me to him. She said, فَكَرَّمَنِ اللَّهُ بِأَبِي زَيْدٍ وَشَرَّفَنِ اللَّهُ وَرَفَعَنِي بِهِ. She said, so Allah honored me with Abu Zayd. Usama named his first son Zayd. Zayd ibn Usama ibn Zayd. So she became Zayd. So she said, كَرَّمَنِ اللَّهُ, Allah honored me, karam, gave me karam through Abu Zayd, and He gave me nobility through him, and Allah Azza wa Jal raised my rank through him, radiyallahu ta'ala anhu wa anha. And so it actually became a very beautiful marriage, and a marriage that, subhanAllah, succeeded, right? Despite the class differences between the two. And she remained sort of a reference point on issues concerning divorce, and issues concerning iddah, and issues concerning nafaqah, the spending and the maintenance after a person is divorced. And there's a huge debate that took place because Omar radiallahu ta'ala anhu in his khilafah did not want to rule by her situation. He saw it either as maybe she made an error in her memory of how things went down, or maybe there was some exceptional case to her. But Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu wanted to rule by what he knew of Allah and the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam's ruling in this regard, of the woman staying in the house of the iddah, and the certain junctures at which support is cut off, and how pregnancy is taken into consideration, not taken into consideration. So that does exist in the case of a discussion and dispute between Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu and her. But the last thing that we have about her radiallahu ta'ala anha is that when Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu was assassinated, في بيتها اجتمع أصحاب الشورى عند قتل عمر بن الخطاب رضي الله تعالى عنه وخطبوا خطبتهم المأثورة. It was in her house that the shura actually convened. The 6 companions convened in accordance with what Omar radiallahu ta'ala anhu had decreed, which shows you that she maintained a status in society and amongst the Sahaba as well. Right? She maintained a certain status amongst the companions as well. And it was there that they deliberated and that they debated about what would happen with the Khilafah. So that discussion, the choosing of the 3rd Khilafah, happened in her living room, radiallahu ta'ala anha. And as Zubayr radiallahu ta'ala anhu says about her, وَكَانَتْ امْرَأَةً بَخُودًا وَالْبَخُودُ النَّبِيلَةً, that she was a woman of great nobility, and that amongst those that narrated from her, and it became sort of Islamic history and fiqh and jurisprudence, were Ash-Sha'bi and Abu Salama. So this was the woman that the Prophet ﷺ married Usama ibn Zayd to, and it is from them that you then have the children that come, and all of this gets absorbed into the lines of the chains of narration. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be pleased with Usama radiallahu ta'ala anhu, his beloved one, the son of his beloved one, and may Allah join us with our beloved one, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, fil firdaus al-a'la, and may Allah azza wa jal allow us to implement and practice and act upon what we learn from these noble stories, and to be noble like these people. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to transcend the artificial divisions and demarcations of man. Allahumma ameen. Barakallahu feekum. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.